My talk today is securely converting text-to-speech input via Emacs. I probably should have written that into the title. It's a key point in my speech. Has everybody used Emacs before? I know it's a very dead technology. It's 1, 2 people. Yeah. Vim's crap. Vim's crap. I used to love Vim. Security holes after security holes. I got a brain and switched. No offense to any of you. The guy in my talk title, that's my spirit animal, I find. It's a character from Freaks and Geeks that I'm not sure if any of you have ever watched the show, but his traits are very key to mine. A little bit about me. I'm a 19-year-old. Sorry, I'm not 19. Am I? I'm a 29-year-old Capricorn. I enjoy swimming, weightlifting, and getting to know the real you. I had something about 10 years ago. I had vacationing in Barbados. I was attacked by a very small shark, but he bit down on my head. Some nerve damage happened, and my right side was entirely paralyzed. I've since been regaining some of that function back, and I'm still going in the positive direction, maybe very slowly, but yeah, it's still coming around. I have a passion for, I don't know. Every one of my passions, as of late, seems to end in a fizzle of, I'm not sure how to describe it. I'm a little bit inebriated right now too, so bear with me. Emacspeak, it's a complete audio desktop environment. Now, what does this mean? What did I write here? It can extract a buffer of user-defined length up to a max of quazillion bits or something, and display it back to, you can then edit it in very surprising ways. One of which, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't about Emacs. This is about Emacspeak. Duh. Yeah, it reads the content back to you, and it enables people with various sight impairments to interact with the computer on a very, very superior scale to what one might expect. Emacs and accessibility. It improves accessibility for the physically challenged. It provides functionality to people who cannot use only a standard keyboard, mouse, or screen. What does that say? Right, so if there's any speech activation software, it does benefit greatly from the use of Emacspeak. It melds in together with that pre-written software, and I mean, I haven't tried every single piece of accessibly enabled software myself, but I think that you'd be surprised how many of them are fairly fluid with Emacspeak. Now, it does call into question. Sorry, was I talking this loud before? Emacs can be run in a secure environment, but ampersand. the OS must enforce rules about access, escalation, and that does open up a new window in which maybe attackers can possibly intercept your communication and do bad things. The default settings of Emacs may require adjustments in large-scale environments containing attackers. Yeah, I said that already. Emacs respects the access permissions of the OS it's running on. So whatever OS you're running, Hannah Montana, Linux, Windows, Macintosh, some other distro, that will always offer a separation, and it will respect the pre-written access permissions that you're running on. Usually, ... accesses are handled differently from the way the user instructs in certain cases. If you're running a certain file name, foo.txt, it recognizes that file name as a text file, and it will then apply features that may have been barred by your previous access permissions. And that's not really the worst deal in the world, but it does create some problems. Authentication. There's several functions that deal with passwords. Read passwd, clear string, etc. It's not foolproof against determined attackers with Emacs internals access. Did that sentence make sense? Remnants of typed passwords remained in the garbage collection, where they can be snooped at by a skilled hacker, but it does create some minor problems. And that's why I strictly, what's the word? I encourage all people who may be wanting to switch over to Emacspeak to get a sense of what exactly they're leaving behind. If it's if they leave behind just traces of your former identity, then that identity will be snooped by a third party and possibly do some shit. Code injections. This is just a brief list of previous hacks that have been used on users of Emacs, and they're what's the word? They are anything used on Emacs can be used on Emacspeak, and that's why the user of Emacspeak is at a heightened risk of running into somebody who wants to do some snooping. Emacs can send commands to other applications as strings, so they implicitly have nothing wrong with them. But other programs that are being activated as the receiver of those strings, they can contain meta characters like an ampersand. I'm sure you know the end line character in many different coding languages. A lot of times that will be interpreted by the Emacspeak interpreter as something completely different from what its original intent was, and does cause some problems. There's a number of functions like shellcode argument that do act to prevent any sort of wrongdoing, but they're certainly not foolproof, and it does require a little bit of insight from you, the user. Emacs attempts to infer the coding systems of the files and networks that it accesses, meaning that when it is dealt a delta file, it will examine that file and it will say, okay, was that coded in Java? Was this coded in Ruby? Was it coded in whatever coding language exists? And then automatically apply these functions to it that may help out with most users. It helps out the functionality of that program right off the hop, but it's not foolproof. Emacs can occasionally do it incorrectly. So the resulting setup can be unreliable. Certain disabilities make this very hard to infer. I know the inventor of Emacspeak, TV Raman, he has very limited eyesight, and so if this were to happen to him, I would guess he would then be in it's like he would be placed in a I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for you, but I can't think of one right now. It would be like a fish out of water sort of scenario where he's just flopping and he can't quite make it back to the older, reliable Emacspeak that he's been used to before. Environment and configuration variables. So POSIX naturally clashes with Emacs and Emacspeak to an extent, because Emacspeak is just a layer on top of Emacs, and that means that certain character strings that are normally identified well by POSIX standards are a little bit obscured by Emacs and Emacspeak. Any uppercase environment variables can be affected, and they can affect the internal behavior of Emacs. So a function may not do exactly what you wanted it to. It might. I don't know. It's up to each individual function to be evaluated. But this can lead to buffer overflow, hung systems, unauthorized authentication. Unauthorized authentication is basically when somebody's able to get privileged escalation to your system without you knowing about it. And that's obviously bad, because then they become the primary user of your system, and from then on, you're fucked. But Emacs does come with customizations that allow us to override non-standard behavior. But again, they must be set in place by a privileged user first. I'm gonna skip that because I didn't do the best homework. Race conditions, that's when like you're running a multi-threaded system, and two processes have been executed by the system at the same time, but for whatever reason, one of them just happens to be a little bit faster than the rest, and ends up reaching a point in its build-up where it requires something that another process should have provided to it before. And there's lots of sort of smart technologies to deal with this. But shoot. Did I mention I had a stroke? Gosh. Please, bear with me a second. Okay, well, we're just going to forget that. Forget completely that I ever acknowledged race conditions. Resource limits. So when a certain string has gone up to so many bytes per second, on normal computers, this doesn't create a problem because the size that is allocated to the stack is fairly big. But whenever you're dealing with like a Raspberry Pi system or just a very bare bones system, it can exhaust the memory of the system, and behavior becomes less reliable. Computation, that normally run to completion will abort back to the top level. Emacspeak is another layer adding additional memory to the heap. So that means that the already slim resources that you're allocated for your session on Emacs, it's just further taken up by Emacspeak, which is a little bit of a problem. Again, no standard computer should ever really have a problem with this, but there are some bare bones computing issues that might run into problems. And Emacs may neglect operations it would normally complete. So, you know, if you're somebody with limited accessibility, either blind or I guess that's really the only accessibility issue that I can think of that could use Emacspeak to benefit them. But it does create a problem with, you know, all of a sudden your system hung, and your system is hung, and there's just it brings them back to the fish in the water scenario where, you know, it takes quite a while to get back up and get running again. How am I doing for time, by the way? 2 minutes, Chris. 2 minutes. Shoot. So is it for me? Give it a try. You know, it's for anybody who does want to benefit from speech-to-text interface. It's great. I've used it myself very minutely, but I'm sure that some users of the program would benefit. I'm not sure if there's anybody in the audience right now who's visually challenged or visually impaired, or maybe they just want to get used to their mouth as a keyboard. It's great. Highly recommended. It won't work right out of the box. It's a program that you have to, what's the word? You have to be malleable with it. You know, it won't immediately be this shining gospel. And sorry, I'm losing my place, and that's not really the best. It won't grant you a Ferrari right out of the box, but eventually, maybe somewhere down the road, you'll become attuned to all the strengths that it can possibly offer. Yeah, I'm very sorry for the haphazard speech, but I just want to let you know that regardless of what I may have presented, Emacspeak is truly a beneficial program to not only those with visual impairment, but to all users of the computer, which is a fairly large percentage of us. And did I mention I had a stroke? Give pity to me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. Questions?